Alice smoothed the wrinkles from the tablecloth and gave the set table one last look. Dinner was perfect, appetizing beef stroganoff, fresh mashed potatoes, and a crisp salad. From the kitchen, the aroma of freshly brewed tea wafted in. It was 6:18 p.m. In 2 minutes, the front door would click open, and John would be home from work. 15 years, the same routine. On Tuesdays, like today, she cooked his favorite beef stroganoff. Alice automatically rubbed her lower back. Her workday at the accounting firm had ended only an hour ago, and she had barely managed to rush to the store for groceries. Her feet ached, her back throbbed, but dinner had to be ready on time. John expected it, demanded it. Her phone vibrated in the pocket of her housecoat. Alice glanced at the screen. "Mom!" Her heart sank. "Honey!" Her mother's voice sounded anxious. "Are you coming over today? Dad mixed up his medication again. I tried to sort it out, but my hands are shaking. I can't put the pills in the organizers." Alice glanced at the clock. Would she have time to serve dinner, wash the dishes, and go to her parents' place? John hated it when she came home late. "Mom, I'll try to come," she said softly. "How are you feeling?" "Oh, same as usual." Her mother tried to sound cheerful. "My knees don't listen to me at all, but I'm managing." Dad fell asleep in his armchair, watching TV. A key turning in the lock echoed in the hallway. "I have to go. John's here. I'll call you back," Alice whispered hurriedly and hung up. She met her husband in the hallway, helping him off with his coat. His movements showed fatigue, but Alice knew he didn't like her asking about problems at work. He'd tell her himself if he wanted to. "Dinner's ready," she said, hanging his coat in the closet. "I made beef stroganoff." John, a sturdy man in his 40s with a neatly trimmed beard and receding hairline, nodded as he took off his shoes. "Smells good," he admitted. "That idiot Williams messed up the quarterly report again. I had to redo everything myself." He walked into the bathroom to wash his hands, and Alice hurried to the kitchen, dishing out the steaming beef stroganoff. 15 years. 15 years of the same conversations, the same dinners, the same habits. The clock in her head was ticking. If she hurried, she could still make it to her parents' house before 9 p.m. "So, Mr. Johnson said the bonus this month will be decent." John methodically cut the meat into small pieces. "Are you listening to me?" "Of course," Alice started, her thoughts returning to the table. "A bonus. That's great. We can finally replace the washing machine. It's barely working anymore." "I was thinking of buying a new TV for the living room." John frowned. "Why replace the washing machine? It still washes, doesn't it?" "It leaks, honey, and it's so loud the downstairs neighbors complain," Alice gently countered. "Nonsense. The main thing is that it performs its function." He scooped up another portion of sauce. "Tasty, but it was spicier last time." Alice nodded, making a mental note: more pepper next time. She barely touched her own portion, glancing at the wall clock. "Do you need to go somewhere?" John caught her eye. "If it's to your folks, I already told you, warn me in advance next time. I don't want to sit alone in the evenings." "Dad mixed up his medication," Alice said quietly. "I need to go sort them out by day. Otherwise—" "Otherwise what?" John interrupted. "Don't exaggerate. Your father can perfectly well sort out his own pills. He's not completely helpless." Alice gripped her fork until her knuckles turned white. Her father, Mr. Robert, had recently turned 72 after a minor stroke last year. He had started having memory problems, but explaining it to John for the 100th time was useless. "I'll just stop by for half an hour," she said conciliatorily, "and be right back." "You went yesterday too." Her husband's voice held a note of irritation. "And the day before yesterday, and every single day for the past 3 months. I'm tired of this. Alice." She put down her fork, feeling a lump rise in her throat. "What about me?" They're my parents. They need help. Hire a caregiver or call social services, John said with a mouthful of food. There are tons of options now, besides you running there every day. They can't afford a caregiver on their pension, Alice tiredly retorted. And social workers come once a week for an hour, and that's not a solution. And I'm not obligated to support your parents. John slammed his hand on the table, making the dishes clatter. I have enough expenses of my own. Alice stood up, took her unfinished portion, and carried the plate to the sink. This conversation repeated itself with irritating regularity, and she knew it was impossible to convince her husband. She wanted to scream, but instead, she silently began washing the dishes. Maybe then we can move them in with us, she suggested for the umpteenth time, already knowing the answer. John choked and coughed. Over my dead body, he cut her off, wiping his mouth with a napkin. The last thing we need is two old people messing up my apartment and turning it into a charity house. No thanks. Alice remembered how 10 years ago, when John's parents passed away, he inherited their 3-bedroom apartment, a country house, and substantial savings. No worries about caring for the sick. They passed quickly, one after another. But she hadn't been so lucky. I'll wash the dishes and go, she said quietly. I promise to be back before 10. John sighed heavily, rose from the table and came up behind her, placing his hands on her shoulders. Honey, how much more? We're a family. I barely see you lately. Family. The word suddenly hit a raw nerve. What kind of family were they? No children. John had flat out refused adoption when it turned out Alice had trouble conceiving. Other people's children are other people's problems and other people's genes, he had declared then with a contemptuous grimace, and she had acquiesced, as she had acquiesced to everything else all these years. I'll be back soon, she repeated, pulling away from his hands. I'll make you tea and cookies before bed. He stepped back, his lips pursed in dissatisfaction. Do whatever you want, he muttered, and walked into the living room, turning the TV up full blast. Alice quickly finished the dishes, dried her hands with a towel, took an old gray raincoat from the closet, and, slipping it on, left the apartment. Only in the elevator did she allow herself to exhale. Her mother's face, tired with faded eyes, flashed before her eyes from yesterday's visit. Her mom complained more and more often about dizziness. It was a 20-minute bus ride to her parents' apartment. Alice got off at the familiar stop and almost ran towards the 5-story building where she had grown up. The entrance hall greeted her with the smell of cats and damp concrete. The elevator hadn't been working for 3 months, and she slowly climbed to the 4th floor, going over her mental to-do list. Her father opened the door, a tall but already stooped man with a gray stubble and cloudy eyes behind thick glasses. Honey, he rejoiced. We were just expecting you tomorrow. I called today, Dad. Alice kissed his cheek and entered the apartment. Mom's in her room. He lowered his voice. She's not well today. She got up this morning to go to the bathroom, and I dozed off. She fell there. I didn't hear her. She lay there for 2 hours until I found her. Alice's blood ran cold. Why didn't you call right away? Well, we didn't want to bother you. Her father spread his hands apologetically. We know you're working. Mom said it was just a bruise. She quickly went to her parents' bedroom. Her mother lay on the bed, covered with an old blanket. At the sight of her daughter, she tried to sit up, but Alice gently held her down. Lie down, Mom. What hurts? My hip got bruised and my arm. Her mother smiled faintly. Nothing serious, just bruises. Alice carefully examined her mother. The bruise on her arm looked menacing, dark purple, the size of a palm. A similar patch of discoloration spread on her hip. You should have gone to the emergency room, she said, carefully applying ointment. What if it's a fracture? A fracture. Her mother waved it off. I'm just old, clumsy. Bruises now take a month to heal. While Alice tended to her mother, her father hovered in the doorway, looking apologetically at his daughter. "I mixed up the pills today," he admitted. "I can't tell which ones are for blood pressure and which ones are for my heart. They're all so small and white." For the next hour, Alice sorted medications into daily organizers, prepared meals for several days in advance, and checked that everything was in order with the stove and plumbing. She habitually ignored her fatigue, trying to get as much done as possible. Her phone chimed with a message from John. "Where are you? It's almost 10. Alice sighed. She hadn't noticed how time flew. "I have to go," she told her parents, pulling on her raincoat. "I'll come earlier tomorrow to help with the cleaning." Her mother looked at her with sad eyes. "John's unhappy," she asked softly. Alice shrugged vaguely. "It's fine. Mom, don't worry. We just feel bad that you're stretched so thin." Her father took her hand. "Maybe we should really call a social worker. I'm managing," Alice said firmly. "Everything's fine." She kissed her parents and left, feeling tears welling up in her eyes. In the hallway, she stopped, leaning against the wall. The truth was, she wasn't managing. She was torn between work, home, and her aging parents, and it was getting harder every day. When she returned home, John was already in bed, pointedly turned away from the wall. Alice quietly undressed, washed up, and lay down beside him. She knew he wasn't asleep. His uneven breathing gave him away. "I'm sorry I'm late," she said into the darkness. "Mom fell in the bathroom. She lay on the cold floor for 2 hours." John was silent for a few seconds, then turned to her. "So now what, you're going to live with them?" His voice dripped with irritation. "They're adults, Alice. They should solve their own problems." "They're over 70, John," she replied softly. "And they can't do it themselves." "And you can, apparently." He propped himself up on his elbows. "Look at yourself, bags under your eyes. You've lost weight, constantly nervous. This isn't normal." "What is normal?" She felt a rare wave of anger rising within her. "Abandon them. Put them in a nursing home. At least don't destroy our family because of them." Alice sat up in bed, turning on the nightlight. "Our family," she repeated. "Do we even have a family? John, you even refused to have a child, and now you demand that I abandon my parents. I don't want other people's children," he snapped, "and I'm not obligated to support your elderly parents. I have my own life." "Exactly." Alice looked at her husband, feeling something break inside her. "You have your own life, and I, it seems, am only supposed to have yours." John snorted irritably. "Stop dramatizing. Just hire them an assistant. That's all." "With what money? John their pension or my salary?" "Just not mine." He cut her off, turning off the nightlight. "Let's go to sleep. We have to get up early tomorrow." Alice lay staring at the ceiling. Sleep wouldn't come. Her mind raced with thoughts of her parents, of what would happen tomorrow, the day after, in a month. How long could she be torn between everyone? And why, after 15 years of marriage, had it suddenly become so unbearably difficult to be next to this man? She turned on her side, looking at her husband's back. John was already snoring peacefully, having forgotten their conversation, but in her chest, a heavy stone had settled, growing larger with each passing day. October was bleak and gray, as if nature itself decided to match Alice's mood. Rain drummed against the kitchen window where she stood at the stove, stirring soup and mechanically cutting bread for John. Her phone vibrated on the windowsill. Alice jumped, seeing the district clinic's number on the screen. "Hello?" Her throat instantly went dry. "Alice Miller," an official female voice said. "This is the clinic. Your father, Robert Thompson, is here with us now. His blood pressure spiked to 201/10. We need a family member to come." Alice turned off the gas and rushed to the hallway for her purse. "I'm coming immediately. Is he conscious?" "What's wrong with him?" "He's conscious, but his condition is serious. We're providing care, but we need to discuss hospitalization." She glanced at the clock. 5:30 p.m. John would be home from work in an hour, and dinner wasn't ready. Alice quickly dialed his number, but he didn't answer. Then she hastily typed a message. "Dad's in the clinic. Heading there now. Dinner's in the fridge. Needs to be warmed up. I'll be back as soon as I can." Grabbing her raincoat and umbrella, she ran out of the apartment. Rain lashed her face as she ran to the bus stop. The bus, as if on cue, was late, and Alice nervously shifted her weight under the flimsy shelter, checking her phone repeatedly. John still didn't answer. The clinic smelled sharply of chlorine and medicine. Alice quickly found her father in the treatment room. He sat pale, with his eyes closed, while a nurse measured his blood pressure. "Dad!" Alice rushed to him, grabbing his hand. "What happened?" Robert Thompson smiled faintly. "Honey, nothing serious. Just got dizzy at the store. They called an ambulance." The doctor, a young woman with tired eyes and a disheveled ponytail, took Alice aside. "Your father needs to be hospitalized. His blood pressure is fluctuating. There's a risk of another stroke. We can send him by ambulance to the hospital." "Which hospital?" Alice clutched her purse strap. "To the city hospital. They have cardiology and neurology. But be aware, we're short on beds right now. You know the situation. He might have to lie in the hallway." Alice nodded. She knew all too well what public hospitals were like. But there was no choice. "Of course, I understand everything. I just need to warn Mom. She's home alone." The next 2 hours turned into an endless series of calls and movements. First, Alice accompanied her father to the hospital, where he was indeed placed in the hallway of the cardiology department. Then she went to her mother, who was in a panic at the news about her husband. "How can I live without him?" Eleanor cried, trying to pack things with trembling hands. "I can't even lift the teapot from the stove myself." "Mom, I'll come more often," Alice reassured her, helping to fold pajamas and toiletries for her father. "Everything will be fine. Dad will get better." Returning to the hospital with the belongings, she encountered a new problem. Her father had been moved to a room, but there were no medications in the hospital pharmacy. She had to go to a 24-hour pharmacy on the other side of town. It wasn't until just after 11 p.m. that she could call John. Her husband's phone was off. Alice sighed and drove home, feeling squeezed dry like a lemon. The apartment greeted her with clutter and the smell of burnt food. An open package of pasta and a dirty frying pan sat on the kitchen table. The TV was on in the living room, and her husband was asleep on the couch, his feet propped on the coffee table. An empty beer bottle and a half-eaten sandwich lay nearby. Alice quietly walked into the bathroom, washed up, and returned to the living room. The TV needed to be turned off, otherwise it would run all night. She carefully picked up the remote, and at that moment, John opened his eyes. "You're here," he said hoarsely. "Do you see what time it is?" "Sorry, I'm late." Alice sat on the edge of the couch, feeling her legs refuse to hold her. "Dad's blood pressure spiked. He was hospitalized." "I just came from the hospital." John sat up, rubbing his face. "So now what, you're going to spend the night at the hospital?" Alice felt her insides clench at the injustice of his tone. "Dad's in serious condition. John, the doctors are talking about a risk of stroke. Mom's alone. What was I supposed to do?" "I don't know." He stood and stretched. "I just know I came home from work, and the house was empty, and there was no dinner. I had to cook pasta myself, and it burned." "I sent you a message that dinner was in the fridge," Alice said tiredly. "You just had to warm it up." "I didn't see any message." He shrugged, not even bothering to check his phone. "Anyway, I'm not going to live on reheated food, spending evenings alone while you run around hospitals." Alice felt a wave of indignation rising inside her, an indignation she had suppressed for so long. "So, what are you suggesting? Leave Dad without help? Leave Mom alone in an empty apartment? I'm suggesting you think about your own family." John cut her off. "Hire a caregiver, contact social services, talk to the neighbors. After all, why do you have to do everything yourself?" "Because I'm their daughter." Alice raised her voice. "Because no one else can help them. And I'm your husband." John also started speaking louder. "And we're supposed to have our own life." They stood in the middle of the living room, looking at each other like strangers. Alice suddenly realized how far apart they had grown. When did this rift occur? When did John turn into this selfish man? Or had he always been like that? And she just hadn't noticed, absorbed in caring for him. "I'm going to bed," she said quietly. "I have to get up early tomorrow. I need to go to Mom's before work." "Of course," John sneered. "You always have an excuse to avoid a conversation now." She didn't answer and walked into the bedroom. Sleep wouldn't come. Thoughts of her parents gnawed at her. What if something serious happened to her father? What if her mother couldn't cope alone? And what about John, who seemed to completely misunderstand her situation? She woke up at 5:00 a.m., quietly got dressed, and slipped out of the apartment. Visiting hours at the hospital didn't start until 8, so she went to her mother's first. Eleanor met her with tear-filled eyes. "I didn't sleep all night," she confessed. "It's so quiet in the apartment without your father, as if he's already gone." Alice quickly prepared breakfast, helped her mother wash and dress, then tidied the apartment and rushed to work, stopping by the hospital on the way. Her father was a little better, but the doctors insisted on a full examination. All day at work, Alice felt like she was in a fog. The numbers in the reports blurred before her eyes, and the phone seemed to ring incessantly, either her mother calling with questions or the hospital needing some documents. At 6 p.m., as she was about to leave, John called. "Where are you?" he asked, without a greeting. "At work," Alice replied, trying to hold the phone between her ear and shoulder to close her computer. "I'm heading home now. I need to go to my parents." She sighed. "Mom's alone. Dad's in the hospital." "Alice," his voice became harsh, like sandpaper. "I'm not kidding. Either you come home, or you don't come home at all." She froze, with her bag in her hands. "What did you say?" "What I said," John articulated. "I'm tired of your constant absences. Either you choose our family or your old folks, but you can't sit on two chairs." "John," Alice tried to speak calmly, though everything inside her was seething. "Let's discuss this at home. I'll just stop by Mom's for literally half an hour and come back." "No," he cut her off. "No half an hour. You're needed here. I'm not going to wait for you all night." "But Mom's alone," Alice exclaimed. "She can't even cook for herself." "That's not my problem," John replied coldly. "Decide." And he hung up. Alice sank into a chair, feeling her hands tremble. What was happening? How had they reached this point? 15 years of marriage, and suddenly such an ultimatum. She dialed her mother's number. Eleanor answered, her voice faint. "Mom, how are you?" Alice asked. "I'm fine, honey. A little dizzy, but I'm lying down. Did you eat some soup? I heated it up." Her mother replied, "Are you coming today?" Alice closed her eyes. John or Mom? The husband she had lived with for 15 years, or the parents who gave her life and now needed her help? "Of course I'm coming," she said firmly. "Wait for me in half an hour." Hanging up, Alice knew she had made her decision. She didn't yet know where it would lead, but she could no longer be swayed by John. The drive to her mother's took longer than usual. There were traffic jams in the city due to an accident. When Alice finally reached her parents' apartment, it was already almost autumn. Eleanor met her at the doorstep. Pale, but dressed. "I was getting ready to go to the hospital to see your father," she said. "I need to see him." "Mom, it's late already." Alice helped her take off her coat. "You shouldn't worry so much. I saw Dad earlier today. He's doing fine." His blood pressure had stabilized. While Alice prepared dinner and helped her mother with her evening routine, the phone rang several times. It was John. She didn't answer, knowing the conversation would only end in an argument. At around 10 o'clock, when her mother finally fell asleep, Alice sat down in the kitchen with a cup of tea. Only now did she allow herself to open the message from her husband. "You made your choice. I'm waiting for you at home. Alice, this is your last warning. If you're not back by night, you don't have to come back at all." The last message had come 20 minutes ago. Alice sighed and typed, "Mom can't stay alone. I'll come home tomorrow morning for my work things." The reply came instantly. "Don't even think about it. I changed the locks." Alice stared at the screen, disbelieving. Changed the locks. In one evening, pure bluff, but it showed how far he was willing to go. She called. John answered after the third ring. "John, have you lost your mind?" she asked quietly, trying not to wake her mother. "What locks? We've been married for 15 years. And you were a normal wife for 15 years. He countered. "Now you've traded me for your old folks. I'm not going to tolerate this." "I didn't trade you." Alice felt a lump rise in her throat. "They're my parents. They're helpless. Don't you understand? I understand only one thing." His voice sounded unexpectedly sober and cold. "You should be with me. Not with them. With me. Or this is the end. You're giving me an ultimatum." She couldn't believe what was happening. "Call it what you want. I'm waiting for you at home. Now." Alice glanced at the clock. Almost 11 p.m. It was raining outside. Her mother was asleep, exhausted from worrying about her husband. How could she leave her? "I can't come, John. Not now. Mom." "Stop talking about your mom," he exploded. "Enough, I'm your husband, not them. Why can't you understand that?" "Because they need me more than you do," Alice blurted out. "You're a healthy man in your 40s. You can take care of yourself, but they can't." Silence. Then John said with icy calm, "Then you don't need a husband. You only need your old folks. Well, enjoy them, but don't come back to me." And he hung up. Alice stared at the darkened phone screen. 15 years of marriage had just shattered against a wall of selfishness. She expected to feel pain, despair, a desire to fix everything. But inside, there was only emptiness and a strange, unexpected relief. She spent the night on the old sofa in her parents' apartment. In the morning, she called work, took the day off, and went home to get her things, hoping John would already be gone. But he was waiting for her, sitting in an armchair in the living room. "I knew you'd come back," he said with a triumphant smile. "Thought better of it. Did you—" Alice shook her head. "I'm here for my things. John, I need to change for work and get my documents." The smile instantly vanished from his face. "Are you serious? You're choosing them over me." "I'm not choosing between you." She walked into the bedroom and took out her bag. "I'm just helping those who can't manage without me. And I can, apparently." John followed her. "Who will cook my dinner, wash my shirts, clean the apartment?" Alice froze with a blouse in her hands. That was it. It all came down to domestic convenience. Not love, not support, but clean shirts and a hot dinner. "You're a grown man, John," she said, folding her clothes into the bag. "You'll manage, or hire a housekeeper. You have a good salary." "Go to hell," he suddenly roared, grabbing her by the shoulder. "You're my wife. You should be here with me." Alice freed herself from his grip. "I'm a person, John, not your property, and I can't abandon my parents in need." "Then get out and go to your old folks." He grabbed a vase from the nightstand and smashed it against the wall. And don't you dare come back! Alice silently gathered the essentials and walked to the exit. At the door, she turned around. I'll pick up the rest of my things later, and we'll need to talk about divorce. Divorce? He laughed, but there was nothing cheerful in that laugh. You really think I'll give you a penny? You'll get nothing. I don't need anything, Alice said quietly. Only my personal belongings. She walked out of the apartment where she had lived for 15 years and closed the door behind her. Strangely, there were no tears, only the feeling that she had shed a heavy burden that had dragged her down all these years. The next 2 weeks turned into a continuous marathon. Alice was torn between work, the hospital where her father was admitted, and her mother, who couldn't be left alone for long. She slept on a cot in her parents' apartment, barely managing to shower and change. John didn't call or text, as if 15 years of shared life had never existed. One night, as Alice lay sleepless, staring at the cracks on the ceiling of her parents' apartment, her phone vibrated. A message from John. Tomorrow at 6 I'll be home. Come over. We need to talk. She stared at those words for a long time. Was this an attempt at reconciliation or a new escalation of conflict? Part of her wanted to believe that her husband had come to his senses, understood her situation. But another part remembered his cold words and indifference towards her parents. In the morning, Alice drove her father home from the hospital. His condition had stabilized, but doctors warned that constant blood pressure monitoring and a strict regimen were necessary. Eleanor met her husband with tears of joy, and Alice, for the first time in 2 weeks, felt she could breathe a little. In the evening, promptly at 6 p.m., she stood before the door of her former apartment. She knocked. The doorbell had always worked poorly. John opened it almost immediately, as if he had been waiting behind the door. "Come in," he said, letting her into the hallway. Alice entered and immediately smelled fried meat. Something sizzled in the kitchen. Apparently, John was cooking dinner. It was so unusual that she was momentarily disoriented. "Come on, sit down." He gestured towards the kitchen. "I made beef stroganoff. Not as good as yours, but edible." Alice cautiously walked into the kitchen. The table was set for 2. A bottle of wine in the center. "John, I don't understand." "Sit down," he repeated, turning off the stove. "We need to talk." She sat down, feeling uncomfortable. John dished out the beef stroganoff and sat opposite her. "I was wrong," he said, looking into her eyes. "I shouldn't have pressured you. Your parents are important to you. I understand that." Alice remained silent, waiting for a catch. "I propose a compromise." He continued, "You come home, and we hire a caregiver for your parents. I'm willing to pay half the cost." She raised an eyebrow. "A caregiver?" "Yes." He nodded. "I found an agency. They have professionals. They'll come every day, cook, clean, monitor medications, and you can visit your parents whenever you want. But at the same time, we'll have a normal family life." Alice looked at her husband, trying to understand what was behind this. Too sharp a change after so many years of indifference. "Why now?" she asked quietly. "What's changed?" John looked away. "I miss you," he said softly. "The apartment feels empty. My life feels empty. I can't even iron a shirt properly. I order food or eat pre-made meals. My shirts are wrinkled. My socks are scattered." He continued talking, but Alice no longer listened. There was nothing in his words about love, about her feelings and needs, only about his inconvenience, about how miserable he was without the service she had provided for 15 years. "John," she interrupted his tirade, "you don't want me back. You want a housekeeper, one who cooks, cleans, washes, and irons." "That's not true." He snapped his head up. "I love you." "Really," Alice said quietly, "and we both know that's not true. You don't ask how I am, What I feel, whether I'm happy. You only care about your own inconveniences." John frowned, a flicker of anger in his eyes. "So you're not coming back," he snarled. "You're choosing old people who will soon die over your husband." Alice felt a wave of indignation wash over her. "Right now, you've shown your true colors," she said, trying to remain calm. "My parents aren't just old people who will soon die. They're people who love me, who always supported me, even when I chose you, even though they saw your selfishness better than I did." John's face contorted with rage. "So you'll just sit with them, wiping their butts until they die, and then what you'll be a pathetic old maid no one wants, and I won't take you back." Alice recoiled as if struck. "That's who you really are," she whispered. "Thank you for finally showing your true self. Now I know for sure that I made the right decision." She turned to leave, but John grabbed her arm. "You're not going anywhere," he roared, pulling her toward him. "You're my wife. My—" "Let go," Alice said calmly, looking him in the eyes. "You're hurting me." "And you're not hurting me." He squeezed her hand tighter. 15 years together, and you just leave for your old folks." "Let go," she repeated, "or I'll call the police." Something dark, dangerous, flashed in his eyes for a second. Alice was scared, but then John released her hand and stepped back. "Get out!" he snarled. "See you in court tomorrow." Alice silently walked to the exit. At the door, she turned around. "You know, I always thought our marriage was a partnership, mutual support, that in sickness and in health weren't just empty words. But for you, it was different. You just wanted a convenient wife who would serve you and never ask for anything in return." John didn't answer. Alice shook her head and walked out, closing the door behind her. Strangely, there were no tears, only the feeling that she had shed a heavy burden that had dragged her down all these years. Alice didn't notice how she reached the bus stop. Her phone chimed with a message. She expected another angry tirade from John, but it was Olivia, her colleague. "Hey, got a minute? I think I might have a solution for your housing problem." Alice smiled and dialed her friend's number. Maybe life doesn't end with divorce. Maybe it's just beginning. The court hearing was quick and formal. John looked haggard and angry, but kept his distance. Alice was calm. She had nothing to divide except 15 years of shared life that had already become the past. "No property claims," the judge clarified, looking at both spouses. "No," Alice replied firmly. "No," John echoed, not looking at her. The court adjourned for deliberation, and they waited in the hallway. John sat a few feet from Alice, engrossed in his phone. She secretly looked at him haggard, with bags under his eyes, but felt neither pity nor regret, only a quiet sadness for the lost years. When they were called back into the room and the divorce was announced, Alice felt a heavy burden lift from her shoulders. She was no longer a wife. She was simply Alice Miller again, a free woman. In the courthouse hallway, John unexpectedly caught up to her. "So that's it?" he asked, and for the first time, his voice held uncertainty. 15 years, and it's all over." Alice looked at him calmly. "It's over, John. We're different people with different values. I want to care for those dear to me, and you want to be cared for." "I could have changed," he said, without much conviction. "You could have," she agreed, "but you didn't want to." They stood in the cold courthouse hallway, two people who had once promised to be together until the end of their lives. "What will you do?" John asked after a pause. "Where will you live?" "I rented an apartment not far from my parents," Alice replied. "Olivia helped me find a good option at a reasonable price. And work. Everything's still the same. Don't worry, I'll manage." John nodded, looking past her. "If you need anything—" "Thanks." She smiled faintly. "Good luck, John." She turned to leave, but he called out to her. Alice. She turned. "Forgive me," he said softly. "For the frying pan." She frowned, not understanding. "Which frying pan?" "The one I threw at you when you were going to your mother in the hospital?" He looked down. I was beside myself. "It's unforgivable." Alice froze. She had completely forgotten about that incident, one of many outbursts of his anger in the last week of their life together. Her mother had been taken to the hospital with suspected stroke, and Alice was getting ready to go, but John had thrown a tantrum over uncooked dumplings. "That's in the past," she said. "Goodbye, John." This time, he didn't stop her. Alice walked out of the courthouse into the cold November air, feeling a strange lightness. 15 years had ended. A new chapter of her life was beginning. Her parents, a new apartment, and who knew, maybe new happiness awaited her. But most importantly, freedom awaited her, freedom to be herself, to live by her values, to care for those she loved without guilt or justification. For the first time in a long time, Alice smiled, truly, from the bottom of her heart, and that smile warmed her all the way home to her parents, who were waiting for her to celebrate her new beginning together. Winter was snowy and cold. Alice adapted to her new rhythm of life work, caring for her parents, tending to her rented apartment. She found an elderly woman from a neighboring building who, for a small fee, came to her parents' place during the day when Alice was at work. It wasn't an ideal solution, but it worked. One December evening, returning from her parents', Alice ran into her next-door neighbor, Martha, a well-known gossiper. "I heard your ex-husband hired a new housekeeper," the elderly woman reported, smiling slyly. "A young one, they say, and not just for cleaning." Alice smiled politely but didn't answer. News about John no longer affected her. "And they also say he drinks often there," the neighbor continued. "Causes a ruckus. The community officer already came last week. I have to go, Martha," Alice said softly. "My parents are waiting." Of course," Martha nodded. "But I'll tell you, you did the right thing leaving. You can't live with a man like that." "He's so selfish." Alice walked down the stairs, thinking about how strangely life was arranged. Just a few months ago, she couldn't imagine herself without John, and now he was like a character from a past life, having nothing to do with her present. At home, a call from the head of the hospital department where her father had been admitted awaited her. "Robert Thompson is feeling significantly better," the doctor reported. "His blood pressure has stabilized, and his indicators are good. I think we can discharge him by New Year's." That's wonderful news. Alice was sincerely delighted. "Thank you so much." After the call, she sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and, for the first time in a long time, felt a sense of peace. Life was settling down. She was managing on her own, without John, without his constant reproaches and selfishness. A knock at the door startled her. Alice frowned. It was almost 9 p.m. Who could it be through the peephole? She saw an elderly man in glasses with a neatly trimmed gray beard. He looked vaguely familiar. "Who's there?" she asked through the door. "Dr. Michael Johnson," the man replied. "I'm your father's treating physician. We met at the hospital." Alice opened the door. Now she remembered. This doctor had indeed consulted her father during his hospital stay. "Come in." She led him into the apartment. "Has something happened?" "Doctor?" Johnson took off his hat and smiled. "Nothing bad. Don't worry. I just wanted to personally inform you that we plan to discharge Robert next week. He's recovering faster than we expected." Alice sighed with relief. "That's excellent news. But you could have called. Why come in person?" "Doctor," Johnson seemed a little flustered. "To be honest, there was a personal interest too," he said after a pause. "I've long noticed how much you care for your parents. It's rare these days. And I thought, maybe we could have tea sometime. Just talk." Alice raised her eyebrows in surprise. The doctor was in his late 50s. He was a widower, as far as she knew, and he was asking her out. "That's very unexpected," she said honestly. "I understand." He smiled. "Perhaps it's not entirely appropriate, but you seemed like a very interesting person, and I thought there was nothing to lose." Alice didn't know what to say. After her divorce, she hadn't even thought about new relationships. But something about this older but surprisingly charming doctor, his calmness, his intelligence, his kindness toward her parents, drew her to him. "Why not?" she finally said. "Just not now. When my father recovers, I'll have more free time." Dr. Johnson's face lit up, but he restrained himself and simply kissed her hand. Then, until tomorrow. Until tomorrow. As she went up to her apartment, Alice felt elated, as if the life that had seemed shattered after the divorce was suddenly coming back together, but in a completely different, more harmonious order. "Mom, I can't believe this," Alice exclaimed, reading the papers her mother had brought her. "You really want to sell the apartment?" It was June, exactly a year after her divorce from John. Her parents had invited her to a family meeting, and the news was completely unexpected. "We've thought about it for a long time," Robert said calmly. "The apartment is large, it's getting harder to maintain, and the money from the sale will help solve many problems." "But where will you live?" Alice was at a loss. "We've found a small apartment in a new neighborhood," Eleanor interjected, "near the clinic, with good infrastructure. Dr. Johnson helped us find an option." "Dr. Johnson?" Alice raised her eyebrows. "You discussed this decision with him." "Don't be angry, honey." Her mother stroked her hand. "We knew you'd be against it, that you'd worry. But he advised us on a good option and even arranged a small discount through a real estate agent he knows." Alice leaned back in her chair, trying to process the news. Over the past 6 months, her relationship with Dr. Johnson had grown into something serious. They spent all their free time together, and Alice felt herself falling more deeply in love with each passing day. But the fact that he had helped her parents make such important decisions without her knowledge was unexpected. And also, "Honey," her father looked a little embarrassed. "We want to give you some of the money from the sale for a down payment on your own apartment." "What?" She was taken aback. "No, Dad. No, that money is yours. You need it more." "We'll have enough for the new apartment and still have some left over," Robert said confidently. "And you've been living in rented apartments your whole life. It's time to get your own place, especially now," her mother added meaningfully. "With a new family on the horizon." Alice felt a blush spread across her cheeks. "Mom, Dr. Johnson and I are just dating." "But I think he's practically family already." Eleanor smiled. "So attentive, caring, and you're happy with him." "I can see it." Alice couldn't argue. She truly was happy with this man, peaceful, secure, warm. He never raised his voice, always valued her opinion, supported her ideas and dreams, and, most importantly, genuinely cared for her parents, not considering it a burden. "In short, it's decided," her father concluded. "We're selling the apartment, buying a new one, and giving you part of the money for a down payment. No objections." Alice just shook her head, feeling tears of gratitude welling up. Her parents, despite their age and ailments, continued to care for her. How could she have even thought of abandoning them to save her marriage with John? That evening, she told Dr. Johnson about the conversation with her parents. "Why didn't you tell me you were helping them choose an apartment?" she asked as they sat in his cozy living room, having tea. "They asked me not to tell you." He smiled guiltily. "They wanted to explain everything themselves. I just helped with contacts and advice. I hope you're not angry." "No," Alice shook her head. "It's just so unusual." John always considered my parents a burden, but you, and I consider them wonderful people. Dr. Johnson simply said, they raised you, which means they deserve all respect and support. She looked at him tenderly. You know, they offered me some of the money from the apartment sale for a down payment on a place. A reasonable decision. He nodded. Renting is constant expense with no prospect, and your own apartment is stability. Mom thinks I should think about the future. Alice smiled shyly. Especially about a new family. Dr. Johnson set his cup down and took her hands in his. What do you think about a new family? He asked seriously. Alice felt her heart beat faster. I think I'm ready for it, if you are too... Instead of answering, he leaned in and kissed her gently. It was their first real kiss, and Alice realized she had never felt so loved and protected before. Autumn was sunny and warm, as if nature decided to grant them a perfect wedding day. Alice stood before the mirror in a simple but elegant white dress, while her mother adjusted her hair. You're beautiful, honey. Eleanor wiped a tear. How happy I am to have lived to see this day. Mom, what are you saying? Alice hugged her. You'll still see your grandchildren. Grandchildren. Her mother beamed. Are you and Michael thinking about adoption? We've discussed it. Alice nodded. Why not? There are so many children who need a family. Oh, honey, her mother cried again, but this time from happiness. What a joy it is to see you so vibrant after John. You seemed to have faded, but now you're glowing from within. Alice remembered her first wedding, a modest reception at John's apartment, his displeasure at having to spend money on food for guests, his irritation when her parents were late due to traffic. What a contrast to today, when Dr. Johnson had insisted on a beautiful ceremony at a restaurant, handled the organization himself, and enthusiastically discussed every detail with her. A knock at the door, and her father, looking younger and fitter in a new suit, peered in. Ready, my beauties. The groom's getting nervous. Let's go, Dad. Alice smiled, taking one last look in the mirror. In the small restaurant hall, their closest family and friends gathered parents, colleagues, a few friends, and, of course, Dr. Johnson with his 2 adult children from his first marriage. His son, Andrew, a serious young man of 30, worked at the same hospital as his father. His daughter, Maria, 28, taught at a music school. Both warmly welcomed Alice, genuinely happy for their father's happiness. The ceremony was simple and touching, as they exchanged rings and kissed to the applause of their guests. Alice felt that her life had finally found its proper course. At the reception, it was noisy and cheerful. Alice's father raised a toast that brought tears to many eyes. To my daughter, who taught me that true love isn't when you're just good together, but when you can't live without each other. And to Michael, who showed her that such love is possible at any age. When the dancing started, Maria, Dr. Johnson's daughter, unexpectedly approached Alice. Can I have a word with you? She asked, leading Alice aside. I wanted to say thank you. For what? Alice was surprised. For Dad, Maria simply replied. After Mom passed away, he seemed to fade. Work. Home. Then back to work. Andrew and I didn't know how to cheer him up. And then you came along, and he came alive again. He started smiling, joking, making plans for the future. Thank you for that. Alice was touched. He brought me back to life, she confessed. After the divorce, I thought I'd never be able to trust men again. But your father showed me that there are completely different relationships, built on respect and support. They hugged, and at that moment, Dr. Johnson approached them. My favorite ladies, what are you plotting? He asked playfully. We're discussing how wonderful you are. Maria smiled. kissing her father's cheek. "But don't get too conceited." When she walked away, Michael put his arms around Alice's shoulders. "No regrets?" he asked softly. "About what?" "About tying your life to an older doctor who already has grown children and a lot of quirks." Alice nestled against him, not for a second. "And you?" He laughed. "I thank fate every day for giving me such happiness in my later years." They stood, embraced, in the middle of the festive hall, and Alice thought about how wonderfully life was arranged. Sometimes you have to lose something to find something much more valuable. Sometimes you have to go through pain to learn to appreciate true happiness. 5 years flew by unnoticed. Their life with Michael was filled with care for each other, and Alice's parents, who, despite their age, were holding up well, and for their adopted daughter, Sophie, a 10-year-old girl they had adopted 3 years ago. Sophie, a quiet and serious girl with huge brown eyes, quickly became the center of their small universe. Alice left her accounting job and took a part-time position at the library to spend more time with her daughter. Dr. Johnson reduced his hours at the hospital and often took Sophie with him on walks, introducing her to classical music and painting. On this sunny May day, the whole family, including Alice's parents, went to the park for a picnic. Sophie ran around with other children, playing tag. Eleanor and Robert sat on a bench, watching their granddaughter, while Alice and Michael spread out a blanket and unpacked the food. "You know what I'm thinking about?" Michael asked when they sat down, looking at Sophie playing. "What?" "About how wonderfully life is arranged. If your father hadn't ended up in the hospital back then, we would never have met." Alice pondered this. Indeed, if it hadn't been for her father's illness, she would have continued to live with John, not noticing how she was slowly fading in that relationship. Perhaps they would have grown old together, she, a devoted but unfulfilled wife, and he, a selfish husband taking her care for granted. "You know what's most amazing," she said, looking at her husband. "That happiness was so close, and I didn't see it. I thought I had to endure, sacrifice myself to keep the family together. And it turned out that a real family is when everyone supports each other, not when they pull the blanket over themselves," Michael finished, squeezing her hand. "I thank fate every day for you, for Sophie, for our parents, for showing me what true happiness is at 60. They sat, holding hands, when a flushed Sophie ran up to them. "Mom, Dad, look who I met." Behind her stood a young woman with a child of about 5. "This is my music teacher," Sophie explained. "Can she join us?" "Of course." Alice hospitably made room on the blanket. "Please sit down." The teacher smiled, but then her gaze fell on Alice, and her expression changed. "Excuse me, do we know each other?" she asked uncertainly. Alice looked closely at the young woman. There was something vaguely familiar about her features, but she couldn't remember where they might have met. "Perhaps," she replied politely. "I'm Alice, Sophie's mom, and I'm Olivia." The woman introduced herself. "Olivia Harris, formerly Johnson." Alice flinched. John's last name. "Are you—" She faltered, unsure how to ask. "I was John Johnson's wife," Olivia confirmed, and a hint of guilt flashed in her eyes. "Or rather, we divorced a year ago." Alice felt Michael squeeze her hand in support. "You worked for John as a housekeeper, right?" she asked softly. The young woman nodded. "Yes, 5 years ago. Then we started dating, got married, and then Harry was born." She nodded at the boy who was already playing with Sophie. "And then everything went downhill. Alice didn't know how to ask, but Olivia understood. "He hasn't changed," she said. "Just the same demands, the same conviction that the whole world should revolve around him. At first, I put up with it, thinking it would get better. But when he started taking it out on Harry, she shook her head. I decided enough was enough. I left him, went to my mom's, and filed for divorce. Alice was silent, processing what she had heard. Strangely, she felt no schadenfreude or triumph, only sadness that John had never been able to change and pity for this young woman who had gone through the same trials. "How is he now?" she finally asked. Olivia shrugged. "I don't know. He pays child support, sometimes sees Harry. I recently heard he's having health problems, something with his heart, but I don't know for sure." They sat for a while longer, talking about children, music, the weather, everything but John. When Olivia left, promising Sophie extra attention in music lessons, Alice thoughtfully watched her go. "What are you thinking about?" Michael asked, putting his arms around her shoulders. "About life's fairness," she replied. "About how everyone gets what they deserve. John wanted someone to take care of him, but he didn't want to care in return, and in the end, he was left alone. And you wanted to take care of those you love, and you got a family that takes care of you," Michael finished, kissing her temple. They watched Sophie play with her grandparents as the sun broke through the leaves of the trees, creating a whimsical pattern on the grass. Life continued, with all its ups and downs, joys and sorrows. But most importantly, they were together, supporting each other on this amazing journey.